Hello, everybody. My name is Benjamin Day,
I am Gillian Mason.
and this is Medicare for All, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, which probably most of you have, the U.S. is wrestling with the massive mental health crisis, impacting young people in particular, especially after COVID. Just to put this in context, about half of young adults and 1/3 of all adults report that they always feel anxious or have often been feeling anxious in the past year. 1/3 of respondents said that they could not get the mental health services that they need. Well, why is that? 80% said they couldn't afford the cost, and more than 60% said that shame and stigma played a role in keeping them from getting the care they needed. And also, the shortage of mental health providers also means that care can be very hard to find, even when we're trying hard to find it. Mm-hmm. So usually on the Medicare for All podcast, you might know, we focus on the stories that we think you need to know about. Today, however, Gillian and I decided to scrap the show and come up with a plan to get an hour of free therapy. So that's just how this show is going to go. Enjoy it. Yeah. Gillian, do you want to introduce our guests?
Yeah, we told them a lot of lies to get them here. Yeah. So really happy to have tricked you. We have two really wonderful guests today. I'm so excited. We've got Lindsay Bish, who is a therapist. She said she's just an ordinary therapist, but I think that she is a super therapist. And an LPC in Illinois, and she's a certified trauma professional. And perhaps most important, and I know this is at the head of your resume, that you were formerly a volunteer for this podcast.
Yes.
Thank you.
It is wonderful to have you here, Lindsay. And then we also have Dr. Pamela Fullerton, recently minted PhD. She's the founder and clinical director of Advocacy and Education Consulting, a counseling and consulting organization dedicated to ensuring social justice and advocacy through equitable access to mental health and well-being services. She is a Latina bilingual certified clinical trauma professional, a certified dialectical behavior therapy professional, a certified clinical anxiety treatment professional, a certified grief-informed professional. Y'all have to get certified for everything. Is that what I'm picking up here? She's also a clinical supervisor and consultant specializing in working with POC communities, undocumented communities, immigration and acculturation, trauma, anxiety, life transitions, and career counseling. In addition to being a professional writer and speaker, Dr. Fullerton is also an adjunct instructor in the counselor education department at Northeastern Illinois University. She's also a volunteer contributing writer for 3 publications and runs a nonprofit to support Latinx youth in the Chicagoland area. Dr. Fullerton consults for 2 behavioral health advisory boards, Sinai Urban Health Institute and Illinois Unidos Latino Policy Forum, providing advice and input to assist in promoting health equity and justice initiatives for underserved communities in Illinois. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Benjamin. I'm so glad to be here.
God, our therapy is going to be so good today, Gillian.
I know. I was reading that and I was like, God damn, I would never have access to this kind of a therapist in South Texas. This is fantastic. That's awesome.
Well, you do if you have Medicaid, if you have Blue Cross, if you have United Healthcare, if you're underinsured or uninsured, we take them all.
It's true.
All right.
Pam's practice does take a lot of insurance.
Awesome.
My practice doesn't. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, actually, let's dig into that right now. We always start by asking, talking a little bit about, how we all end up here. And Ben and I actually both ended up involved in healthcare activism because of our own mental health struggles. And so we were wondering, why did you both decide to become counselors? How did you decide to make mental health your profession?
I'm going to let Pam start there.
Cool.
Well, actually, social justice and advocacy has always been my profession. I started very young working for places like police neighborhood resource centers and doing multicultural based work through people that I knew. My mom worked for a multicultural center at a community college. And so advocacy and social justice work has kind of been through my lifeblood.
You're a movement baby, I can tell.
Yes. So I remember working for a police neighborhood resource center in a marginalized neighborhood in Illinois. And there was a licensed clinical social worker who was in charge of that place. And so she would be working with the adults while I worked with the children. And I was like, I want to be like that lady when I grow up. And that's really how I got started into thinking I have a love for education and I love for social justice and advocacy. How do I mix those two worlds? And that's how I came about counseling.
That's
Good
awesome.
answer.
Yeah, good answer. Of course it's a good answer. It's our experience. Oh, it was a really good answer.
Well, she could have said it was for the money. I mean, we wouldn't believe you, but
Yeah.
So, Lindsay, I understand you are in this for the money. Is that correct?
I thought I wish. That's my old salary. It's so interesting you say that because I worked in corporate marketing for so long. I'm actually like a recent convert into this profession in the last year and a half, 2 years. I was a late in life career changer. I'm actually turning 40 this year. So I spent like the first whole part of my professional career in corporate marketing. And then like right before the pandemic started, I really just had this like, I don't know, crisis of conscience, a tipping of the spiritual canoe, if you will, where I was like, I knew I wasn't going to be doing corporate marketing anymore. And I had spent so many years in my own therapy. And there was kind of like a confluence of events that happened in my personal life that led me to realize like this was kind of something I really wanted to pursue, is to become a therapist. And it is rooted in similar things that Pam talked about. Like it's about how do I help people get like liberated, like in their conscious, and like mental health seemed like a really great way to do that. Now I say all that, and I'm also saying mental health is still fraught with like, you know, it's a part of the state, like the way we operate, we're licensed as part of the state. And there's things that are not completely liberating about that by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But it's been an honor to like make the switch and do the work. But no, I make a third.
Oh, wow.
A third of what you were doing corporate marketing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that
Okay?
I thought you were saying you made a third of what Pam makes, and I was like, let's get into that.
I in fact think Lindsay might be making more than me. She gets paid.
I do get paid, but I will say, like, look, like it's been a great career switch for me because people like Pam, my mentor at Northeastern Illinois. So like, you know, getting like being kind of like in that, swimming in that soup, if you will, like the social justice liberation soup in mental health. I think there's like a lot of sea change headed that way. And Pam was like a really great person for me to kind of embrace that side of me as I was doing mental health. So here I am.
If either of you are motivated to take another step down the pay ladder, you can become directors of small nonprofits.
Which Pam is that. Plus,
well, there you go. You know it.
It's fine if it's a side hustle.
Right.
Yeah, it's all hustle, no pay.
You are 100% right.
Well, this is a good transition because one of the first things I wanted to ask was just like, tell us about what is counseling as kind of an occupation. Gillian was joking before the podcast started. She's like, is counseling just therapy for people who have never lived in New York? But I'm curious because, you know, what's the difference between a counselor and a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a social worker? You can get mental health care and even maybe therapy from so many different categories of providers. Yeah. What is the counselor niche? I guess I'll ask Pam first.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a historical perspective on this, as I often do. And this is what I teach to our students who want to become counselors. So counseling started really out of a movement for career development and exploration, rehab counseling, coming out of the wars. Okay, so veterans needed to, like, now that I'm not longer a veteran, what do I do with my life? Right. And that was really the beginnings of counseling work. And because we were stemmed in working with people as they transition out of, you know, different careers, as they transition and move from like recognizing that life has changed. I need something different. I need to still feel fulfilled though in what I'm doing. That is really the work that counseling came out of, which is a subset of things like psychiatry and psychology, which were much, much older. Think Freud, because that's who everybody thinks. So we're talking 1800s, right? We're talking hundreds of years of the psychological behavioral health type sciences. Counseling took a different direction though. It said, it put like people at the center of what we do, and it took their livelihood, their lifestyle, their well-being at the center, and said, how do we support you in ensuring you have the type of life and lifestyle and well-being that you want? This is why, for me personally, counseling spoke to me, because I think it's about the breadth of life, right? I think it's about taking experiences past, present, future, and figuring out if this is not who you want or what you want, then let's figure out what it is and how we get you there.
Wow. It sounds also like, I mean, given that history of coming out of the wars, it sounds like counselors sort of from the beginning have been dealing with a lot of people with trauma who are carrying trauma into their future lives, right?
Yeah, but here's the important part. It's not determining that because you've had this trauma, that's who you are, and what will happen to you will be stemmed only from this. It's recognizing you're more than just that. So what counseling does is we don't deduce people, we don't reduce people to just singular events that may be things like psychotherapy, which is where the word therapy came from. The early beginnings of the types of therapy that there were, it was kind of like, oh, let's look what's wrong with you. Well, now we know that's what's wrong with you. So that's your issue, and this is what's going to happen to you as a result. It was very deterministic, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the approach we take as clinicians.
Yeah, and to answer like you're talking like the interchangeable terms. So, I mean, most people, like when we practice, like a lot of us go by therapists, but some of us go by counselors, but it is like those terms can often be interchangeable. However, there's like subsets of counseling that are not traditional therapy, like career counseling, right? Like you can go see a career counselor versus like seeing a counselor who is ostensibly a therapist, right? A psychologist is somebody who basically has their PhD, right? A PhD in psychology, and they're doing therapy work as well. And probably charging more for it. Then a psychiatrist is somebody with a medical degree. So they are the prescribing doctors in the mental health field. So like as counselors, therapists, we cannot prescribe. We can diagnose, but we can't prescribe. And so we will often send you to a psychiatrist to go get like that official diagnosis and prescription.
So our therapy session isn't going to be as good as I hoped.
No, it's not.
Not if you want medication.
That's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
It does always come down to that for me. So, all right, this is so interesting. I've learned so much already. So let's talk a little bit about how we get into this fucked up business of mental health care, right? Not that mental health care itself is fucked up. It's awesome. But the fact that it's a business is pretty fucked up. And we know that that's influenced a lot by these health insurance companies. So let's talk about how health insurance companies impact our ability to actually, or your ability to actually give people the care that they need. So I know that there was a Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, right? That was passed by Congress, I think first in the 90s and then again in 2008. And so it was like designed to prevent insurers from providing worse coverage for mental health than they do for medical or surgical health. But so do you feel like mental health providers are treated the same as medical doctors when it comes to insurance companies and payments?
Is that a serious question?
We like to serve up the softballs early on.
Yeah. Everything's fine, right?
Well, here's the thing, right? I'm going to take a historical approach again, and then Lindsay can always add her comments afterwards. But historically, counselors haven't been in existence for as long as social workers, psychologists, and then psychiatrists are different because they're medical doctors, right? So they fall under that. But the two other behavioral health type clinicians are psychologists and social workers. They've been on the scene. So they've been recognized as being providers, right, for healthcare. Counselors we're newest to this scene. We're about 100 years old, which isn't very new, but in the field of medicine it is. And so there's still this very institutionalized feeling of like you have to prove yourself and your worth in this field. The issue with that is that we are plentiful. There's a lot of counselors. And so by not providing us that ability to see clients, right, and no matter what type of insurance they have, they're limiting the amount of clinicians, providers that are available to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, it's this really, it's a weird dichotomy, right? Like Pam's like, we're newer into the medical field, but we are asked to practice in a medical model, which means that when we have clients that come to us and they are billing insurance, that's how they're paying for their sessions, we have to diagnose them with something. And look, I'm the kind of clinician that talks to my clients about their diagnosis. I know a lot of clinicians don't. Right? Like they don't tell their clients that they have a specific diagnosis, and it's often really surprising to clients to hear like, "Oh, wait, you mean you had to give me some kind of diagnosis to bill insurance?" And so
that shocks me every time. I have to say, like when I realized that there was actually something written there when they were like sitting there and talking to me or whatever, I'm like, oh, major depression, eh?
Yeah, and it's really like it can really set people back because they just don't understand totally what that means. And it's something that's in a record of theirs that can be accessed by other institutions. And so it can have major implications, right? So we're asked to operate in this medical model, but therapy is like medical and it's not. It's science and it's art and it's philosophy. It's a lot of things. It's not just one straight shot, a one-to-one kind of interaction. And, what's really interesting is you have like all these different therapeutic models that have been trying to get like what we call evidence-based practice, right? So they'll spend like all of this money on researching on like, hey, is my therapeutic model that I came up with an effective model? And so they'll do all of these studies in the field to be like, look, see, here's how it's effective. And some insurance companies really glom onto that. And they're like, cool, well, that's the only kind of therapy that we will pay for then, which is why cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT is so prolific. I mean, is it effective? Yeah, it's effective for a lot of people. And for some people, it's not. But like a lot of insurance companies are like, okay, well, what was that CBT technique that you use? Can you like put it in the note? Right. And even the idea around notes, because we are in the medical model in America, like we're one of the few countries that like actually has to do notes for every session. Like this is
really.
Yeah. And we try to be really, really sparse with the details in our notes because those things can be like subpoenaed by a legal court. And also, like we don't want everyone knowing your business, but we have to take notes after every session, like the contents of that session and the techniques that we used, because you have to prove to insurance that like we did something and we're working towards your goals. And there's
that
like
is wild.
I know. And I had people in my cohort who were like from Argentina and Brazil, and they're like, oh my God, we never would have had to do that back home, and it's just, there's pros and cons there, right? Like we like accountability. And also it's like, it's really hard sometimes to fully describe like a thing that happened in session, like how it matters, like a very specific goal that's in a treatment plan. It's, if you've been in therapy before, it's not just one thing. It's not like going to a doctor and being like, cool, like you have a sinus infection, here's your prescription. So
God, I wish it were though. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Well, but you can't treat the things the same exact way, right? And I think, and again, this is the opposite side of, well, what happens if we just did our work and we didn't have to have any accountability in terms of writing a note or giving a diagnosis? You wouldn't believe the amount of people I have coming to my office. And when we talk about like, oh, have you been to therapy before? Oh, yeah. Well, tell me about that experience. It was awful. I just talked. And then somebody would say, and how did that make you feel afterward? And then there was no work being done. And I didn't get any better. Right. This is, to me, this is the business side, where there are pros and cons. And this is a pro, is that, well, technically, if that's all you did and you can't show that you did anything else, I'm not sure that this is the best thing for you to be doing as a job, right? Because we need to be providing better services. Because if I went to a doctor and they prescribed me something wrong, I can sue them for giving me the wrong treatment. Or I was supposed to have a spleen removed and they removed a kidney. There's malpractice, right? We have to have, if we're going to be in the health model, we have to have some accountability to say what you're doing, the time we spend together is actually going to benefit you.
And yeah, and I agree with that. And also to your original point, though, too, Joe, the question you asked is like, how does having insurance tied to this make it difficult? Well, right, because it's tied to the medical model, that's like what gets us to get paid by insurance. But that is like fraught with so many challenges in and of itself, right? What insurance will pay for. Insurance payouts vary state by state. They vary provider by provider. It's hard. It's a hard thing to navigate for sure.
Interesting. So, sort of along those lines, I mean, who decides what gets covered by insurance plans when it comes to mental health diagnosis, and in particular, like from the provider side of things, how do you navigate your client's insurance coverage when it comes to, at the very beginning, Pam, you were saying, oh, we take Medicaid, we take this, we take that, which doesn't sound like that's not normal across all providers.
No.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate your patients or your clients' insurance coverage?
I don't sleep, Benjamin. Like I am up day and night doing all this work. It is difficult. I'll prep it by saying this. No, you're right. I'm sure there's not a ton of providers like myself who do that additional work because it is a lot of work. However, because I'm social justice minded, what would it be like for me to not take the thing that's the only thing allowing clients to get this type of service, right? Because who can pay $150 an hour, $175, $200 an hour? I have students who were my students who are now in the field and charge more than I do. That was not even a thing, right? It's like, but it is a thing. So if you don't have insurance, for the majority of us, I don't think we can afford something like that.
Yeah.
And so insurance allows for individuals to somewhat, and there are caveats to this, but afford the type of services that are needed. And yes, there's a difference between like I own a private practice versus like a community mental health practice where they take all insurances and they help with sliding scales and things like that. But there are various places that can support, but you kind of have to know how to navigate that system and you have to know what to be looking for. But it is a lot of work on the provider's behalf. It really is. There's paneling that's involved, right? There's like Medicare, for example. Counselors just got Medicare approval January 1st of this year. So we can now see Medicare clients for the first time ever. But here's the thing. First go around, my Medicare application was denied.
Yeah, my supervisors was too. Yeah.
Why was my application denied? Here's why. Because in the state of Illinois, the IDFPR, which is the place that hosts our licensing, it made us change from being an LLC to a PLLC. So we had to become a professional limited liability company for anybody in the behavioral health sector. When my name changed from LLC to PLC, the IRS didn't make that change. So now when I go to sign up for Medicare, they said, your name isn't the same.
So there are like literally elderly people sitting out there who could be getting mental health treatment from you, but because of fucking like spelling, right?
Yes.
Oh boy.
And not only that, but like that act also expanded so like couples and families could be seen on Medicare, Medicaid for the first time. So a lot of like couples and families counselors, like that was a new thing too. Especially here in Illinois. So like even like for younger people too, right? Like, I mean, it was like a huge deal to be able to start taking those things. And so Pam is a fully licensed person in Illinois. I'm what's known as a provisionally licensed person, which, by the way, I don't care what state you're listening to from right now. This is how it works. There's provisionally licensed people who are just starting in the field and stuff to like get their hours up to become a fully licensed person. So Pam can have her own practice. I can't. I have to work under a supervisor for a certain amount of time. And when you talk about like who gets to decide like what insurance are taken, I don't get to decide that. It's who my supervisor decides because I'm billing under her license. And so Pam takes a whole, because it's her business, she gets to take a whole host and a whole range of insurances. I'm a provisionally licensed person, so I can't. And my supervisor has made the decision to only take one kind of insurance. And the reason she did that is for the reason I mentioned earlier, no two insurance companies pay out the same rate. And they don't even pay the same rate per state. And so at some point, there's certain insurance providers, United Healthcare, that it doesn't even like if you panel with them because like the payout is going to come late. Probably it's probably going to be really small. It's gonna be like, what was it like? Was it worth for me to like do all of this effort to just get paid? Versus in Illinois, typically you can bet Blue Cross Blue Shield PPO is going to be like the most consistent, highest payout. And what I think what a lot of people don't realize, and I made a TikTok video about this a couple months ago because I had people ask me like, well, how does this work? Like, how do you decide what rate you're going to charge? There's a rate we charge. There's the agreed rate that the insurance company is actually going to pay. And if you're a provisionally licensed person like me, you're only getting a fraction of that payout. So you're not even getting the full payout, right? And so it really becomes like this numbers running game. Like, what is it even worth for me to be paneled under? And like, what is the effort to payout ratio that I'm going to give this insurance company? And that's really difficult.
There's a phrase that we use for when patients have a hard time accessing care, not because of cost barriers, but because of, like we call it rationing by inconvenience. Like insurance companies will make it so hard to get the care that you need that a large percentage of people won't be able to reach the end.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds like you all are rationed by inconvenience as well when it comes to like
100%
going up against insurers. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you were alluding to too, Ben, is like, who decides like what gets paid out? Like, I know some insurance companies, like if someone's diagnosed with PTSD, they won't touch that with a 10-foot pole and they'll deny because that's like a long-term treatment plan. Right. And that can be really difficult. And so sometimes like you're playing the game of like, what diagnosis can I put in that is still true that I think is going to get covered?
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. And Lindsay, you sent us this story that you've got to tell people about about how the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, is developed. This is kind of the industry standard for mental health diagnoses. But
so the Diagnostic Statistic Manual is like a dictionary, almost like an encyclopedia of medical health diagnoses that we are allowed to input into, and it all has like F codes attached to it, right? Like those are the F codes that get billed to insurance so that like we get paid back for those diagnoses, for the therapeutic / medical treatment we are providing against those diagnoses. And by the way, only America uses a DSM. Everywhere else, they use something called the ICD. So we love to be special, right? So
American exceptionalism.
Yeah, I know. We're on
means we're exceptional, right?
We're so exceptional. We are on the fifth version TR. What does the TR stand for again, Pam? I never remember.
It's technically the sixth version.
Yeah.
But because this is a very expensive book, and people wouldn't want to buy a whole new one, they did what is called a text revision.
Yes.
And so that's the TR part. So they added new things to it, but instead of having to reprint and have everybody reprint, really it's like more so in an electronic form if you want it, until they get ready to make DSM-6. This is like the interim. The DSM-5 TR, the text revision.
This is worse than trying to keep up with new iPhone releases.
Like the DSM at least sits around for like a while, right? But the way the DSM gets made, it's managed by the APA, or the American Psychological Association. And historically, what it has been is like a bunch of people getting into a room together, a bunch of psychologists. And it used to be, of course, like a bunch of white dudes that were psychologists hanging out.
Well,
in
duh.
And allegedly they have, and I think they've expanded that to be like social workers and therapists and counselors. Like they bring like additional people to the table and doctors and, but they get together and it's like a round table consortium where people are talking about the diagnoses, essentially, like what should be a diagnosis and how do we define that diagnosis? And they will list like all the criteria. And you know, the DSM has evolved now, and I'm like heavily air quoting in my mind, evolved to mention things like cultural implications, gender implications, like additional comorbidities you should consider, social factors that should be kept in mind when you're thinking about these diagnoses. Because a lot of these diagnoses, like when we think about the research behind them, they are normed on like white men, white people, white women in America and Western Europe.
Right. People at home may know the DSM from classifying homosexuality as a disease up until 1987 or something like that.
Yes.
Like,
or like gender dysphoria, right? I mean, so like
hysteria.
Yeah, it has like major societal implications in terms of like what we consider well and what we consider ill in mental health. Right. And it is, you know, so now it is in the state that it's in. But this is like how we determine what is a diagnosis and what's not. And someone might be like, oh, that's really like feels really subjective. And like in some ways, there's a lot of subjectivity to that. What has happened recently, though, and this has been like, if you're not in the mental health field, you aren't like aware of this kind of chaotic thing happening. Anyone who sits on that commission to create the DSM, they have to disclose like funders that they've received money from, whether that's like a pharmaceutical company, an insurance company, like basically who they're doing research from, or like where they've like done speaking opportunities and things like that. And these people who sit on the panel have taken an extraordinary amount of money from medical institutions, from pharmaceutical companies, from insurance companies. And these are the people that are making decisions about like what is a diagnosis and what's not, and what is insurance going to pay for and what's not. And I mean, it's really frightening when you think
terrifying. Yes, terrifying. Yeah.
Well, the research industry is the same exact way, right? Like, why are certain types of therapies evidence-based? Because somebody put a whole lot of money in to have them do research to show, oh yeah, this really does work. So it's you know, fraught in our field and in the medical field and in many institutionalized fields where the money goes, then the changes will be made based on what they find and what's good for them.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And it's like, I think what's really interesting too is like a lot of the stuff that's in the DSM, not in the DSM, in evidence-based practice, like what Pam was just talking about, like what modalities will get funded for research and get like approved by insurance and what won't. A lot of these things are like just based on like indigenous like practices, like people of color, like ways of knowing that have been going on for a long time. And they basically had to like turn it into, well, here's that, like let me retrofit it into like a very white scientific either or kind of mentality to get you to buy off on this. You know? And so it's fraught, you know, it's like we all are trying to do the best that we can, but there's definitely a lot of like landmines to step on when we talk about like the history and the institution of mental health.
Yeah. So like, between those landmines and then the kind of landmine of dealing with insurance and with the kind of economics of the thing, you know, obviously like the impact is, we can see like the impact on you, right? Is that you're like struggling to provide the care. Impact on, you know, people who need care is that they're struggling to get the health care that they need. And like Ben said at the top of the show, right, we're going through this huge mental health crisis in America. Debatable, I think, whether people are getting less mentally or people are getting more mentally ill, or we're just recognizing it more. I don't know. But regardless, okay, so people are going to all sorts of different lengths, right, to try to get mental health care outside of this system, right? So I know Ben's going to talk a little bit about how the industry sort of does that. But one of the things that people have done, right, is they started sort of crowdsourcing their mental health on places like TikTok and Instagram. And in fact, there's HK in the comments who's suggesting that we go to Instagram for someone who can cure mental illness with magic mushrooms and microdosing, which may be true. Yeah, so there's like this whole like segment, particularly of TikTok, of mental health talk, right? And it's like, you know, people talking about their symptoms. Sometimes there are experts involved, right? Like counselors or therapists or psychiatrists who are actually talking from their own experience. Sometimes it's just random people who are like, I have ADHD, do you? You know, I feel like there are so many good things about it, right? Like when I look at it, I'm like, oh shit, like I'm not alone here. Like that's really awesome. Maybe it's like bringing up issues that I didn't really know that I had or whatever. But then also like, you know, like I think I told you guys before the show that I like diagnosed myself with adult ADHD. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm happy with that diagnosis, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I should have someone else weigh in. So just like in general, how do you feel about this like kind of phenomenon of people like crowdsourcing their mental health info?
It's probably the same way I feel about insurance. There are pros and cons, and we are working within the system to make it better. So, on the pro side, I like people that are talking about mental health, right? Because what did you say, Benjamin, as a statistic? There's a large chunk of people who don't go receive services because of the stigma associated with it. So if we talk about it more, the hope is that it becomes more natural, more normal, as people like to use the word, more normalized, I guess is a better way to put it. And it's like, no, we can talk about mental health. It doesn't have to be this mysterious, stigmatized issue, right? On the other hand, do I want a bunch of people self-diagnosing or hearing somebody else diagnose and go, well, that sounds like me, now I'm that thing, and then go and ask a provider to go give them medicine for something that they're not sure that they're really diagnosed about? Do I want a society full of that? I don't think so, right? Like, I don't think that would be beneficial to us. So instead, it's like, okay, if you think that, then let's do, what's the next step? What's the next step, right? And I want to be curious and open about, what do you think about this diagnosis? Why do you think it would benefit you to have it? What purpose is it going to serve for you to have it or not have it, or whatever the case may be is? And then we're going to kind of dive into that and really figure out, is it necessary for you? Would it be beneficial? Would it serve you? Would it help you in some way, shape, or form for your life, right? And let's make sure that it's right. Because the bottom line is, and as a trauma therapist, I say this all the time to my clients, ADHD and trauma look like this, okay? They look like the exact same thing on paper. And if you don't really understand how past traumas, complex trauma, as we like to call it, has impacted your life, then very well might be, oh, ADHD, it's ADHD, right? But unless you know that we can go into that history and be like, is it though? And really look to see, maybe this is the source of healing that needs to happen for some of that symptomology to be lessened or removed. But you wouldn't know that if you're just crowdsourcing on Instagram.
Oh my God. You can tell that I'm right on the edge mental health wise these days, because every single sentence that you say makes me want to cry. You know, like, ADHD and trauma are like this, like, oh God. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Positives and negatives to people, you know, having those conversations.
There's a certain kismet to social media causing everyone's mental health crisis, and then also offering the solution to it at the other end. It's like cigarette companies investing in oncology centers or something.
Oh my gosh.
It's really tricky too. Like Pam said, it is a double-edged sword. I love when a client comes in. I will tell you that I especially love when a woman or a person of color comes in and thinks like, hey, I saw this thing on TikTok and it made me curious and I wonder if I'm this. Because of the thing we just mentioned before, a majority of this research on diagnoses, especially neurodivergence diagnoses, ADHD, autism, these things have been normed on white people, white men specifically. The ADHD symptoms, because one of my specialty areas by treatment populations is late in life diagnosis of ADHD adults. And, you know, but like for men, it's very easy because like all the ways that the symptoms have been described and even the way the medication is configured is meant for them. And so I get excited like when a woman or person of color comes in and says like, could it be this? I'm like, cool. I do the same thing Pam does. I'm like, maybe not. Let's get curious and figure out like what it means for you. But I do think like this like trying to access via social media, it has some dangers to it for sure. And also can be liberating for people who've like found like mental health space doesn't feel like it's for them all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, another interesting thing that's happening too beyond social media is people using AI like to
Wow.
you know, like and a lot of therapists like get nervous, like, oh my God, like is AI gonna take over therapy? Maybe I'm being naive, babe in the woods. I feel like I don't think that is a thing that could happen. Like, sorry, it could happen. Do I think it will happen? No, because I genuinely believe like people like to be in relationship for healing, but I also have clients who do have neurodivergencies, and they've talked to me about like sometimes I debrief on my therapy session by going on to Chat GPT and like talking about what I talked about in therapy and like getting feedback on that from like a robot.
Wow.
And it's like, again, like these things are happening. Social media, the proliferation of information, AI, I think it's going to change the way we practice. It's going to change the way people can access certain parts of mental health. It's just something like we have to be aware of and how we're going to work within that.
And Lindsay, you're actually on TikTok, right?
Yeah.
Talking about mental health issues. Yeah.
Yeah. I talk a lot about like mental health, like in my specialty areas, like tips, ideas, thoughts. I'm also a pretty open political therapist. I'm on the Medicare for All podcast right now. So I talk about that and like social liberation issues in psychology. And it's been like a really great space. But there's like, pros and cons to that, because the old school way of thinking about therapy, which there's a good reason for this, is like, hey, you need to be a blank slate, you know, and not so that way your client can come in and feel like completely safe with you and like, you know, and kind of bring their own full self into the room. And that's a choice that I made. Like I put myself out there. So if you see me, you're either going to want to work with me because of those things, or you might not want to work with me because of those things. And so it's a tricky balance for sure.
So I have another question. This is probably maybe in the similar line with the impact of social media. And I'm guessing this is going to be another one of these like pros and cons types of situation, but especially since COVID, you know, we've seen kind of a rapid growth in virtual mental health services, well, virtual everything, but definitely mental health services. And probably every one of us has now been like inundated with ads for BetterHealth, you know, the kind of virtual therapy platform. But it feels like there might be a risk there of like the Uberization or like Airbnbification of mental health services. Have you noticed like an impact on the counseling profession, and just like how do you see the new virtual platforms impacting, you know, just the state of mental health care?
Well, I'm okay as long as they are like clinically licensed clinicians on these sites, and you're getting the type of service that you would get at any other place, right? That makes sure that they're being held accountable to the same type of standard that we have to hold ourselves accountable to in this field. I will say, though, that something that is a real bother to us clinicians about these services is that they have taken our profiles, like myself, and they'll put it on their site, and they'll be like, you can come see Dr. Pamela Fullerton.
What?
Click on me, it goes to someone else because I don't work for them.
Wait, seriously? That can happen?
And so then somebody is like, well, I connected with the profile of this person, but here, we'll send you to this person instead because I don't.
Sounds illegal. Somehow.
There are a lot of just like very dicey. Look, I come from marketing, right? I come from the former life. So like in theory, I love the idea of a better health for access, right?
Yes.
Everything, I can't say everything. A majority of the comments and the discourse I've seen around things like better health that was not a good therapy experience for me, for the same thing that Pam just described, like either bait and switch or a therapist really not being held up to exact standard and code. There's also a lot of questions about like, look, we get licensed state by state, and we do not have state by state license reciprocity, which is like a whole other can of worms. Like we could open.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get, like, if I'm practicing in Illinois and I'm treating someone in California, like what laws am I beholden to?
Right.
How am I getting paid? And then, you know, a lot of people know about this, maybe some people don't, but BetterHealth also for a while was selling users' data for marketing.
Right. Great.
Fantastic.
So wild. So like when you talk about the profiteering of mental health, to me, that is like something like a better health is like the evolution of that is so grotesque. It's like the thing none of us want, right? Like in theory, it could be a great thing. In practice, it is a late stage capitalist nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, I want think about this. All right. And we haven't gotten into this yet, but all right. For example, I'm covered under my husband's health insurance. We have a yearly $8,000 deductible.
Right.
Okay.
So you're basically uninsured
if I want to go see a provider, I've got to pay $8,000 before my insurance kicks in. So people who use BetterHealth, I imagine, and this is what I hear, many of them use it because of issues like that. Well, I can't afford my patient responsibility of $150 for my deductible each time I go until I've hit that $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $8,000, whatever the case may be is. So BetterHelp says we can get you licensed therapists. All you got to do is pay the subscription, right? And so
prayer is involved as well. Yes.
$30 a month is a whole lot cheaper than trying to get to knock out your $8,000 deductible.
Yeah.
People don't understand that necessarily when they're using their insurance.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I wonder also about like how much of this has to do with like I know I live in South Texas. I live in a majority Latinx community, and we're a mental health desert. We have. I literally, to get my mental health care, I go to the community health center and they make me sit down in a room where I then telehealth into Houston, which is about 6 hours away from me, so that I can get my mental health care that way. Right. And so like, I think that like those better health things, like in some ways what they're trying to address, right, is that just lack of providers.
Inequity, right. And I will say, because I see a comment in the chat, this is not an administration issue, because I have clients who have $250 deductibles and they're working under the same presence that we are, right? So their $250 deductible is nothing. That gets eaten up one time and now they're able to use it. This is company dependent.
Yeah.
Right. This is a company privatized dependent thing. So companies need to do a better job, because in this country, insurance is tied to employment.
Yep.
So companies need to do a better job of fighting the insurance companies to say, I don't want this cost going on to my employees. Let's make a better, more manageable deductible, and let's make sure that they get the type of insurance that's covered, right? Or if not, let's offer things like employee assistance programs, which I also contract work for. And so there are big companies, Microsoft, Schneider Electric. I mean, I don't know if I'm supposed to name these companies, but large companies, Allstate, that say, hey, we want to provide free therapy for our people. They get 10 free sessions, 24 free sessions, 9 free sessions. Some only get 6, but whatever the case may be, is like they provide additional support that they don't have to pay for, right? So, okay, let's see how we can do that job better on the employee behalf. And then what I believe, employment shouldn't be tied to insurance. Everybody deserves to get covered for their medical, mental health, and life-based services in order for us to live better lives and be more productive members of society.
Yeah. And to like add on to that, we talk about like how difficult it is because our insurance is tied to employment in this country. When your insurance changes because your employer decides that it has changed, randomly, you get impacted across a variety of things. There's something particularly insidious about what happens in mental health, though. Imagine spending like a year with somebody, spilling your guts, and talking about the most intimate details of your life. Oh, and then your insurance changed and you can't go see that person anymore. I lost 3 clients at the end of 2023 to that.
Wow.
Their companies deciding to take a a cheaper insurance plan, a
Mhm.
worse insurance plan. And then it was like the scramble to go and try to find like, okay, who can I refer you out
Who can I
to?
refer you to? Mhm.
And I will say, because like Pam is one of the outliers of people who like take United Healthcare in Illinois. But like a lot of these companies are like switching to United Healthcare because it is so cheap. And it is like such poor service, and they don't really think about it. And then it's like the scramble to go find somebody who's going to take United Healthcare.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's
I feel
Speaking
like-
of which,
Yeah, can we just talk a little bit about United Healthcare?
our last episode of the podcast was about United Healthcare, and specifically about the basically the medical records and medical claim system that they own, which was hacked and went down for almost a whole month. I'm imagining that impacted counseling professionals as well as everyone else. If you had, yeah.
I mean, I think I feel really lucky that the practice that I work for, it is not, we don't manage claims through Change Healthcare. A majority of my colleagues, a lot of them do. A lot of them are not getting paid for months, or not months, sorry, for like weeks and weeks. And it was really scary.
Can't imagine why they didn't rush to fix this problem.
I know. Well, right? Because now they can just go and offer to like buy up your clinic if they want to. But anyway, and look, like if you're a small mental health clinic or a mid-sized mental health clinic, the margins are already really, really tight. Like even more so than like in the medical field. So just imagine like what that looks like in terms of like people not getting paid or like having to like shut down service. I mean, it's just. And for us, we have it's same ethical standards as medical, like it's do no harm, right? So like we have to keep seeing people because if we stopped seeing them, like there's a considerable harm done there. So I just can't say enough like terrible things about that situation. It's just,
it's shocking.
It's shocking. It's a nightmare.
It's shocking.
I mean, we also live in, to be fair, in an industry where anything that is now can be hacked.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So I'm not going to 100% be like, that was completely their fault. It's like we now have privatized, we now have made everything digital, and now we put ourselves at risk. And so we do our best, in this industry. We try to do our best to make sure that those breaches don't happen. And we have to continue to see what else is out there to improve those. But I think that's anything. I mean, do you know how many flyers I get? Your information could have been breached from this company.
Yeah.
This company, right? It is a part of the world that we're living in that we need to find better ways to improve upon, right? So I try. I'm not an optimistic person. Don't get me wrong. I'm not this chipper, like there's always some rainbow, but I am realist. And realistically, currently, this is what we're living in. So we need to do a better job to make this better for everyone. And that's where I would rather put my efforts and energies into, is spending to figure out how can I make the best of what I have. And then spreading the word and educating to say we can do more, but this is what you have currently. Let's work on both of those avenues, working within what we have and then also improving what we have.
That is absolutely beautiful, and also a segue to my final question, which is, a lot of what you're talking about here sounds like harm reduction, right? Like we have a dangerous system, and you're really trying to do the work that you do within that system, and trying to kind of do the most ethical job that you can within that. And then you were saying that kind of desire and an effort to transform the system, right? But we are always talking. What we do here is Medicare for All. That's why it's called the Medicare for All podcast. And so we keep trying to promote this idea of taking healthcare out of a business model because we don't think that it works. And so what I wanted to do just for the last question is just to do a little dreaming together. What might it look like if mental health care were not a business? What would it look like if you didn't have to deal with insurance companies, co-pays, deductibles, or whatever? How might that actually change your practice?
I think for me, I would definitely be thinking like about more creative wraparound services for clients, right? Like not just like the one-to-one therapy all the time. Like some people, it's like, how can I creatively think about groups and like community-based stuff, right? Or, you know, like if it wasn't tied to this like this business system, I would happily be able to like I take sliding scale clients now, but like I would have more room for that, right? Like for services. I can only take so many right now, like I mentioned earlier, like the fraction of the fraction that I get. You know, if it wasn't tied to this business model, oh God, like I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Pam probably has more to say about than that, but like, I could like, it would just be so different.
I think it's kind of telling that it's like so far outside of your experience that you're like, I don't know. Pam, what do you think?
I see us finally being able to do the work we really want to do, which is preventative work.
Yes.
You know, I hate to see people come to my office because now they're in a crisis and life has had to fucking stop for them. It's like just grenades were thrown off, and now it's like, well, now I can't do anything because there's just grenade droppings everywhere, right? And it's like, no, we can't be in a place in our society where you finally cross yourself across that border to get help because you're in a crisis state. We need to be preventative. By the time kids can read and think and understand, we need to be talking about mental health. We need to be talking about how do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of each other? How do you take care of your community? Right? How do we heal together collectively and feel better about who we are in the society in which we live in? That's what I want to see. I want to see a place where the healing has already started years before, instead of the harm we continue to do to each other, and then pray that we have access to services to help us.
Yeah. I'm so sorry again. This gets me.
No, please don't apologize.
I'm so sorry. But when you said I want to be to a place where the healing has already begun by the time I get in the room, like that is that's just something that I feel like we should all aspire to as a society. It's beautiful. It's really good.
And it sounds like the roots of counseling is sort of in that, the more proactive, like helping people, you know, reintegrate into society. And that's not a diagnosis-based approach to counseling either, but in the origins.
I mean, treating really human problems takes really creative human solutions. And I think we want to be freed up to do that. Like we want it to be rooted in reality and research and, you know, community and indigenous ways of being. Like we want all of the things. We just want to be freed up to be able to do it without a company telling us how we do that, how many sessions we get to do that for. And
and obviously we wouldn't have those 80% of people who are not getting mental health care because they can't afford it. We would still have work to do around stigma, that you can't solve that with a bill, unfortunately. Or you can certainly help it with policy. But thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. I really learned actually so much this episode. And I want to thank our podcast volunteer team, our podcast managers, Angelique Davis, our show notes writers, Jerry Katz, and our audio editor for this episode was Christian Brandt. So, you know, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to the Medicare for All podcast on your favorite platform. And this podcast is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. So if you want to support our work, you can donate at our website, healthcare-now.org. Thank you all so much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.